A child's death, a dog's instinct, and a secret too dark to bury. Elara Jensen vanished on a sunny afternoon. One second she was at the lake, laughing in a yellow swimsuit. The next, a man was screaming, "There's a kid drowning!" Chaos. Screams. Divers. But no body. A death certificate was signed, a funeral held, a casket lowered without her inside. Only one being refused to accept it. Argo. Her dog. Every morning he returned to her grave, not to mourn, but to dig. And as the town watched, divided and confused, more dogs joined, as if answering a call only they could hear. What followed was a mystery that unraveled everything. A fake name, an empty box, and a secret carved into the woods. Because death isn't always the end, and not all graves are meant to be filled. Fair Hollow slept beneath a sky of bruised lavender, the last stars trembling on the edge of dawn. The houses on Sycamore Lane sat quietly, wrapped in soft shadows and autumn chill. But number 27, the Jensen house, was already stirring. Graham Jensen sat at the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, hands hanging limp. The room behind him was still. His wife, Dana, lay with her back turned, her breath shallow and deliberate, like someone pretending to be asleep but listening with everything they had. The digital clock glowed 5:16 a.m. He didn't need it to tell him. His body had memorized this hour. Every morning for the past 2 weeks, someone had woken him. Not with sound, but presence, like the air shifted, like something inside the walls had exhaled. From downstairs came the unmistakable clink of the side gate. Graham stood quickly. "Damn it!" he muttered. By the time he was down the stairs, Argo had already made it to the sidewalk. The German shepherd, lean, muscular, his coat a dusty blend of tan and charcoal, moved with the precision of a soldier. No collar, no leash, no hesitation. Graham burst through the door in socks and flannel. "Argo, get back here!" But the dog didn't even glance back. He was already disappearing down the foggy street, paws clicking like metronomes on pavement, straight toward the town's cemetery. Graham's pickup groaned in protest as he backed out of the driveway barefoot, half-dressed and shaking. The heater hadn't kicked in yet, and his breath frosted on the windshield. He didn't bother to wipe it. He knew the way. Pine Arrest Cemetery lay a mile east, past the old train yard, and beneath the ridge line. As the sun crawled up behind the hills, the place took on a pallid glow, wet grass silvered with dew, rows of headstones catching morning mist like gauze. And there, like every day now, was Argo. He was a silhouette against the stone angel. Front paws deep in dirt, nails clawing madly. Dust kicked up in rhythmic spurts. The grave marker read, Elara Jensen, born April 8th, died July 3rd. Forever 8. The sight familiar, and no less devastating punched something low in Graham's stomach. But today was different. He wasn't alone. 3 other dogs, one of them, the O'Malley's golden retriever, the other 2 strays he didn't recognize, were digging beside Argo. Not in separate spots, not scattered. Together, on the same grave, the same dirt. What the hell? Graham stepped out of the truck, slammed the door harder than he meant to. Argo! Stop it! His voice cracked. But the shepherd didn't stop. None of them did. They didn't even flinch. The retriever growled low in its throat. Not at Graham, at the dirt, at whatever it thought was under there. Suddenly, footsteps on gravel. Graham turned to see Frank Johnson. the cemetery's old groundskeeper, hustling down the path with his ball cap askew and panic in his gait. "For God's sake, make them stop!" Frank's voice broke. "It's like they're possessed." Graham didn't reply. He couldn't, because deep inside a part of him had stopped resisting what it feared. Maybe they were. 10 minutes later, Sheriff Lewis Mason pulled up, dust trailing behind his cruiser. He stepped out slow, placing his hat on his head like a man bracing for a storm. Mason wasn't the type to rattle easily. He'd served 2 tours overseas, wore his badge for 25 years, and had once stared down a rabid cougar with nothing but a shovel. But this? 10 dogs digging in synchronicity at a child's grave? It sent a whisper down the spine. Graham stood with folded arms. "They started yesterday with just 2 others, now there's 10. They ever dig anywhere else?" Graham shook his head. "Only here, only this spot." Mason crouched, watching closely. Argo paused for breath, his chest heaving, muzzle dusted with soil, then went back at it with even more desperation. Mason narrowed his eyes. "He's not digging randomly. He's focused, like he's trying to reach something specific." Frank threw up his arms. "Or someone buried food, or a raccoon carcass, or hell, I don't know, bones." Graham's voice dropped. "We already buried those bones, Frank. 3 months ago." That made Frank go quiet. Mason rose and took off his hat, glancing down at the angel statue carved into the marble. "I remember this girl. I remember her funeral." "She was my daughter," Graham said. The sheriff nodded solemnly. "Graham," he said carefully, "maybe it's time we stop assuming this is grief. Maybe we ought to consider what these dogs are trying to tell us." The breeze picked up. Leaves rattled against the iron fence. Somewhere in the distance a bell rang faintly, someone's back porch wind chime. Graham walked to Argo. Kneeling beside him, he reached out gently and placed a hand on his neck. The dog paused. His eyes met Graham's. They were amber, intelligent, and lit with something no scientist could measure, a knowing. "You're trying to bring her back," Graham whispered. Argo gave a low whine. Then, without fanfare, he returned to digging. By 6 o'clock a.m., the sun had begun to rise over Fair Hollow like a ghost reluctant to show its face. The air smelled of damp soil and faded flowers, the kind left behind by people who meant well but hadn't returned since the funeral. And in the center of the cemetery, beneath a statue of an angel whose wings had weathered to streaked gray, the dogs kept digging. 10 of them now. The sound of their claws against earth was constant, rhythmic, unsettlingly unified. Like they weren't acting alone, but as parts of something greater, something ancient. And the town was beginning to notice. Cars began to line the gravel path beside Pinerest Cemetery. Not many. Fair Hollow didn't have a traffic problem, but enough to make the morning feel wrong. Residents stepped out in slippers, wrapped in coats over pajamas, whispers already forming before the doors shut behind them. "Is that the Jensen girl's grave? Did you see it online?" Someone posted a video. "That's the shepherd, right? Argo? I heard he went crazy. They say he won't stop till he digs her out." One woman clutched her Bible. Another made the sign of the cross. A man muttered something about devil's work. No one stepped too close. Just watched. From behind car doors and fence posts. Only Frank Johnson, the cemetery caretaker, dared move forward, storming toward the grave like a man whose sanity had just been stretched past breaking. "This is it, Sheriff," Frank shouted as he saw the patrol SUV roll in. "You see it now? I wasn't exaggerating." Sheriff Lewis Mason parked slowly, and stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. He adjusted his hat, eyes scanning the scene like a battlefield. He took in the torn grass, the cratered soil, the pack of dogs who paid no attention to the crowd, no attention to anything but the dirt. Frank was nearly red in the face. "You tell me what I'm supposed to do with this. I'm filling in holes every day, every damn day, and they keep coming back like it's their job." "They're not hurting anyone," Mason said calmly. Frank jabbed a finger toward the grave. "Not yet. But look at it, Lewis. Look at their eyes. That's not normal." Mason stepped closer. He saw Argo at the center, his fur streaked with soil, his paws caked in layers of dust and mud. But what stopped him cold was how exact the dog's digging was. Not random, not scattered, precise, focused. A circle no wider than the casket they'd buried 3 months ago. Mason narrowed his eyes. "That's the exact spot." Frank snorted. "What? You think the dog's got a map?" But the sheriff didn't answer. Instead, he crouched, watching the shepherd's movements. Argo would dig furiously for 15 seconds, pause, sniff, reposition 2 inches, and start again, never straying from the grave's center. This wasn't random grief. This was deliberate. "Where's Graham?" Mason asked. "He's over there." Frank gestured toward a tree where Graham Jensen stood with his arms crossed tight across his chest, like someone holding in a scream. Mason walked over. "You've seen this before?" he asked quietly. Graham nodded. "Started with Argo. Maybe 2 weeks ago. Then the neighbor's dog started showing up. Now it's this." "You feed them?" "No. They don't come for food. They show up before dawn, like they know where to go." Mason looked back at the crowd. It had grown nearly 24 now. Someone had pulled out their phone and was recording. A woman wept softly near the fence. "What do you think it means?" Mason asked. Graham's voice was hoarse. "I think he's telling me she's not there." The sheriff didn't respond. Because deep down, in the hollow of his bones where instinct whispered louder than reason, he feared Graham might be right. Frank wasn't done. He stepped between Mason and the grave, waving his arms. "Look, you're the law. So here's what I want to know. Are you going to let them keep desecrating a child's grave? Or are you going to do something about it?" Mason stared at the grave, then at Argo, who, at that moment, stopped digging. The dog lifted his head, turned toward the sheriff, and let out a sound that wasn't quite a bark, more like a plea. Then he turned back to the grave and resumed digging. Mason exhaled slowly. "Frank," he said, voice low but clear, "you call this desecration, but I think we might be looking at a warning." Frank blinked. "A warning?" "I've seen dogs act on things we can't. Smells, instincts, even memories. Sometimes they know what we refuse to see." He turned to the crowd. "Everyone back. I'm closing off this area." Someone in the back called out, "Are you saying something's buried there?" Mason didn't answer. Because what haunted him wasn't the possibility that something new had been buried. It was the possibility that something was missing. As Frank threw up his arms and stormed away, Mason walked to the edge of the circle, crouched again beside Argo, and laid a hand on the shepherd's trembling back. "You want us to listen," he murmured. "All right. We're listening." The sky had cried that day. Not a full storm, just a steady drizzle that soaked the grass and muddied the paths, like even the weather couldn't pretend to be okay. Black umbrellas bloomed across the cemetery like wilted flowers. Raindrops clung to coat sleeves and eyelashes, mixed with the quiet sounds of breath held too long. They had buried an empty box. Graham remembered the priest's voice, gentle, rehearsed, floating just above the rain. He remembered the crunch of wet gravel under boots, the way Dana's fingers trembled in his as the white casket was lowered into the earth. It was so small, too small. But what he remembered most was Argo. The dog had been quiet at first, standing beside Dana like he understood what was happening, his ears back, tail down. He watched the proceedings with those intelligent amber eyes, motionless, as if waiting for a command that never came. But then, just as the first shovel of dirt hit the lid thud, something in him changed. It started with a low whine, barely audible, then a sudden lurch. He broke free of his leash. In a flash of tan and black fur, Argo charged the grave. People gasped. The funeral director dropped his umbrella. A child cried out. Graham dove forward, arms wrapping around the dog's torso just as Argo reached the edge of the pit, growling, clawing, snapping at the dirt, like he could undo it all. "Argo, no!" Dana had screamed. But the shepherd wouldn't stop. He writhed against Graham's grip, claws scrabbling against the wet grass, his breath coming in frantic bursts. His eyes locked on the white coffin, on the disappearing shape of the only human he had ever truly followed without question. He wasn't mourning, he was resisting. It took both Graham and the sheriff to drag him away. Even then, his cries echoed across the cemetery long after the last word had been spoken, long after the umbrellas had closed, long after the mourners had slipped away, grateful, perhaps, that they hadn't been the ones burying a child with no body inside. 3 months later, the echoes remained, not in sound, but in the silence, in the stillness of a room no one had dared to change. Elara's bedroom remained untouched, books still on the nightstand, her shoes lined up at the closet door, a poster half peeling from the wall. Her favorite stuffed elephant sat where she'd left it by the window, watching the driveway. Graham spent hours in that room, not doing anything, just being. Sitting on the edge of her bed, sometimes reading her stories aloud to no one, sometimes tracing the edges of her drawings with a finger, sometimes just breathing, as if being near the last place she had truly been could keep him tethered. Downstairs, Dana moved like a ghost through their home. She had returned to teaching after only 2 weeks, not because she was ready, but because the walls of their house had begun closing in. The sound of the dishwasher, the squeak in the stairs, the faint echo of laughter that no longer lived there. It was too much, too cruel. So she smiled for her third-grade students, held it together until recess, then locked herself in the staff bathroom and cried until her eyeliner bled, and then returned with a tight-lipped smile and hands that smelled of soap and grief. They didn't talk much anymore, not because they were angry, but because the weight between them had become too large to lift with words. Grief, in its most devastating form, had made them fluent in silence. And then the digging began. At first it was only Argo. Graham had found him gone one morning, fence pushed aside, leash untouched. Hours later, a call from the cemetery. "Your dog's here and, well, you'd better come see." He had arrived to find Argo covered in dirt, front paws blistered, fur matted with sweat, digging like something was pulling him from below, like he was trying to undo something he couldn't accept. Graham had tried to stop him, had called his name over and over, but Argo didn't flinch, didn't blink. It took physical force to pull him away, and even then Argo cried the whole ride home. Long, keening wails. Not bark, not growl. Mourning, or maybe warning. That night, Graham sat awake, a bottle of whiskey untouched on the table. Argo lay by the door, panting, paws twitching in his sleep like he was still digging. Something inside Graham cracked open then. The dog wasn't losing his mind. He wasn't rabid. He was trying to speak, to tell them something they had refused to ask. What if she hadn't drowned? What if the box they buried was a lie? What if Elara was still out there? July 3rd. The kind of day that felt like a postcard someone might send and never quite forget. The sun was bright but not cruel. The air smelled like charcoal, sunscreen, and cut grass. And along the shore of Cedar Mirror Lake, the whole town of Fair Hollow had gathered to celebrate its most cherished tradition, the annual community picnic. Red and white checkered blankets stretched like a patchwork quilt across the slope above the lake. Folding tables groaned beneath crockpots of macaroni and potato salad. Kids chased frisbees and bubbles between the shadows of old oaks. Laughter rose and fell like waves against the dock. And in the center of it all, manning the grill with sleeves rolled high and a smudge of ash on his cheek, was Graham Jensen. "Medium or well?" he called out, flipping burgers like he was back on deployment. Someone yelled, "You know we're not all Army, right?" He grinned for the first time in weeks. "Well done it is." Sweat rolled down the back of his neck, but he didn't mind. His hands were busy. His mind was calm. For the first time in a long while, life felt almost normal. Dana stood under the lemonade tent, ladling drinks into plastic cups and squinting against the sun. She wore sunglasses and her favorite summer dress light blue, floral, the one Elara always said made her look like the sky. She kept glancing toward the lake, scanning. Not because she was worried, just habit. There, a flash of yellow. Elara. Their daughter was in the water with the other kids, wearing her brand-new swimsuit with the cartoon seahorse printed across the front. Dana had bought it the week before, tucked it into a drawer with a little note. "For my sunshine. Love, Mom." Elara had beamed when she found it. Now she paddled along the shoreline, her dark curls bouncing as she laughed, her goggles crooked, her hands slicing water like fins. Not the strongest swimmer, but determined, always determined. Argo, their German shepherd, was tethered beneath the nearest tree, panting quietly beside his bowl of water. His eyes never left Elara, not for a second. A few people wandered over to Graham, plates in hand. "You gonna run for mayor if you keep flipping burgers this good?" joked one of the town council members. Graham chuckled. "Only if I can outlaw mayonnaise on hot dogs." Someone booed behind him. Someone else raised a drink. The music from the old radio switched from Motown to Springsteen. From across the clearing, Dana called out, "Elara, time for a popsicle." The girl bounded from the lake, droplets sparkling on her arms. Donna handed her a grape-flavored one, the kind that stained lips purple. She ruffled her daughter's wet hair and kissed her forehead. "Don't forget to reapply sunscreen." Elara rolled her eyes but grinned, her mouth already tinted violet. Dana smiled, watching her walk away barefoot across the grass, sticky fingers leaving spots on her swimsuit. She didn't know it then, no one did, but that was the last time she would see her daughter's face in sunlight. 2:17 p.m. A sharp, panicked voice cut through the summer air. "There's a kid in trouble! Out past the ropes!" Heads turned. The voice came from the dock, Paul Vickers, a man who had moved to Fair Hollow just 3 months earlier. He was waving both arms, eyes wide, pointing toward the deeper water. A few people shouted. Someone blew a whistle. The lifeguard sprinted toward the shoreline. Graham dropped the spatula. Dana spilled the lemonade pitcher. And no one, not one single soul, noticed Argo's sudden transformation. The dog had stood, stiff and trembling, his ears locked forward, his body a coil of tension. A low bark escaped his throat, then a whine. Then he lunged. The leash snapped like twine. Argo bolted, not toward where Paul was pointing, but in the opposite direction, toward the far end of the lake, toward the boathouse. "Argo!" Dana shouted. But he didn't stop. The last thing Graham saw before the crowd swarmed was Argo vanishing through the cattails, his body moving with surgical urgency. The shepherd knew something. He knew it before anyone else. The moment Paul Vickers pointed and shouted from the dock, the world fractured. Whistles pierced the air. Children screamed. Folding chairs toppled as adults lunged for the water's edge, knocking over coolers and picnic baskets in their panic. Lifeguards sprinted across the sand toward the deep end of Cedar Mirror Lake, the spot Paul had indicated. One of them kicked off her sandals mid-run. Another yelled for a rescue float. All eyes were trained on the area just beyond the roped swim zone, where the gentle slope of the lake bed gave way to sudden depth. "Do you see her?" someone shouted. "I think I saw a hand." "I can't move. Let me through." Graham ran faster than he had in years, chest heaving, legs burning. Dana's voice rang out behind him, thin, terrified, cracking. "Elara! Elara!" The lake exploded with motion. Men dove in clothes and all. Children sobbed against their mothers' legs. The picnic had unraveled into panic in under 60 seconds. And amidst all of it, no one noticed Argo. Not at first, not as he snapped his tether, not as he bolted across the grass, not as he bypassed the crowd charging toward the alleged drowning site and sprinted in the opposite direction. He moved like a bullet low, fast, focused cutting through the chaos like a creature possessed. No hesitation, no confusion. His nose was down, ears locked, body tracking something none of the humans could see. He didn't run to where Paul Vickers had pointed. He ran toward the old boathouse at the far end of the lake, half shrouded by cattails and willow trees, long abandoned since the town's rental program shut down 5 years ago. Most people forgot it even existed, but not Argo. He knew the scent. He knew her. Dana screamed again, this time more in disbelief than panic. "Where's he going? Argo, come back!" But it was like yelling at the wind. The German shepherd reached the edge of the water near the boathouse, paws skidding in the muddy shoreline. He barked a single piercing blast that turned a few heads, then another, and another. People kept shouting. "Is that Elara's dog? What the hell's he doing over there? Someone grab him!" But Argo wasn't barking for attention. He was signaling, desperate, urgent. His whole body bristled with warning. Then he plunged forward. Water exploded around him as he leapt into the lake, not toward the crowd, not toward the roped-off zone, but along the edge where shadows licked the surface and no children swam. He thrashed with purpose, cutting through the water with powerful strokes, heading straight for the cluster of reeds that masked the old boathouse foundation. He dove. He barked again, wild, frantic, then disappeared behind the weeds. On the other side of the lake, no one followed. The lifeguards were too busy dragging the bottom where Paul had pointed. They threw out ropes. They blew whistles. They screamed her name. But there was nothing, no hand, no splash, no sign of anyone at all. Graham stood waist-deep in the lake, turning in circles, arms trembling. "She was just here," Dana kept saying, over and over, like a prayer or a curse. "I just gave her a popsicle." "I saw yellow," someone swore. "I swear I saw her out there." The crowd clustered tighter. But no one looked toward the boathouse. No one except a single elderly woman, Margaret Finch, who watched from her folding chair beneath a maple tree, a pair of binoculars hanging around her neck and a quiet wisdom in her eyes. She squinted toward where Argo had disappeared. "He's not wrong," she whispered. Back by the old dock, Argo emerged from the water, soaked and furious. His bark had shifted, no longer urgent, but defiant. He shook violently, sending a halo of droplets into the air. His paws hit the ground hard, digging at the muddy shoreline. He ran in a tight circle, then returned to the waterline, growling low. Graham finally noticed him. "Argo," he muttered. Dana turned, too, her breath caught. "Why is he over there?" He wasn't confused, he wasn't panicked. He was pointing. Not toward where everyone else looked, not toward the illusion, but toward the truth. And no one listened. Not yet. Not that day. The search began within the hour. By sunset on July 3rd, the once jubilant lakeside had transformed into a gridlocked operation site. The sound of laughter had been replaced with sonar pulses, whirring drones, and the hum of search boats slicing through murky water. Elara's name echoed across the waterline again and again, called by strangers and loved ones alike. Each repetition sounding smaller, more uncertain, like the very syllables were disintegrating into the lake. But the lake offered nothing back. No bubbles, no floating fabric, no hair caught on brush, no trace. Just silence. Deep, still, unapologetic. They dragged the lake for 3 days. Volunteers combed the shoreline. Divers from the county rescue unit searched every crevice, every outflow, even as storms rolled in and visibility dropped to inches. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters overhead. Nothing. Day 1 brought speculation. Day 2 brought dread. Day 3 brought concession. "We've seen this before," said Dr. Leonard Klein, the town's senior physician, as he removed his glasses and sighed in the Jensen's kitchen. "The current can carry them. If she slipped into a deeper trench or hit her head—" He trailed off, looking at nothing. "But she's not there," Graham said. Voice even. Empty. "We don't know that for certain," Klein offered gently. "But enough time has passed that—" Dana, her knuckles white around a tea mug, cut in softly. "So, we're supposed to bury—" "What?" "Air." Klein hesitated, then opened the folder in his lap. The witness statement from Mr. Vickers was detailed. He identified her yellow swimsuit, said he saw her go under and never resurface. "But no body," Graham repeated. Klein nodded. "But with multiple people affirming the same direction and the depth in that area, we have legal precedent. We can issue a death certificate without physical recovery." He passed the document across the table, its header already filled out. Dana signed first. Graham stared at the line with his name on it for almost 2 minutes before scribbling it in barely legible ink. Argo, curled beneath the table, thumped his tail once, then was still again. The funeral was held 8 days later. There was no body, just a small white casket. Inside, Dana had placed Elara's favorite chapter book, The Secret Tree, a stuffed elephant with a worn ear, and a charm bracelet they had made together the summer before. 5 beads, 1 for each year since she'd started school. The 6th was a tiny silver E. She was supposed to get the last 2 on her 9th birthday. Dana whispered, stroking the bracelet as she lowered it into the satin. Graham couldn't bring himself to put anything in. Instead, he stood at the doorway of the funeral home, back straight, fists trembling at his sides. Behind him, Argo paced in tight circles, tail down, ears forward. He growled not at anyone, but at the box. On the morning of the burial, Graham nearly collapsed. It wasn't the crowd, or the priest, or the headstone. It was the sound of the lid closing. That sound. The click of finality. He staggered. Sheriff Mason caught his elbow before he could fall. Dana sobbed quietly beside him, knuckles pressed against her mouth. And Argo, until then, quiet, lunged. It took 2 handlers to restrain him. The shepherd snarled, twisted, thrashed, the same way he had that first day, his eyes locked on the casket with a focus that sent chills down the spine of even the funeral director. He barked like a warning, a siren, a refusal. They tried to calm him. He wouldn't be calmed. In the end, they sedated him. He dropped heavily to the grass as the final shovel of dirt fell. Afterward, people whispered, "That dog was too smart. Maybe he saw something. Maybe he just doesn't understand." But Graham stood by the grave long after everyone left, after the tent came down, after the last casserole dish had been returned. He looked at the small stone marker, looked at the earth, looked at Argo, sleeping unnaturally, chest rising and falling in drugged breaths, and for the first time in his life, he didn't believe what he'd just buried. Not really. Not in his bones. Because something inside him, something primal and wordless, was beginning to whisper the same thing Argo had tried to scream. "She's not here." At first it seemed like a coincidence. The morning after the burial, Argo was back at the cemetery. His leash had been reinforced, his gate locked. But somehow he'd gotten out. Again. Graham found him just after 6 a.m. Mud-slick paws, fur clumped with dew, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of relentless effort. He had resumed his digging at the exact spot where Elara's casket had been lowered. Graham didn't stop him. He just stood there, quietly, a thermos of coffee untouched in his hand, watching. But the next morning, Argo wasn't alone. A yellow Labrador stood beside him. No collar, no tags, eyes focused, paws already blackened with soil. By sunrise, the day after that, there were 4. By the end of the week, 10. A husky with one blue eye, a wiry mutt with a crooked tail, an aging golden retriever that limped but dug like his bones remembered something the world had forgotten. None were from the same household. Some had never even been seen in Fair Hollow before. And yet every morning just before dawn they gathered at the same place without barking, without fighting, and began to dig. In perfect rhythm, as if answering a call that humans couldn't hear. On day 8, Dana finally filmed it. She had come alone, wrapped in a coat far too thin for the morning cold. Her phone shook in her hand, breath visible in the air. She said nothing, and the video only panned across the silent circle of dogs clawing the earth in unison. Not like animals, like mourners. She didn't mean to post it, but something inside her snapped that night, and by 2 a.m., and the footage was online. The caption was simple. "Elara's dog won't stop digging. Now he's not the only one. This has gone beyond grief." Tesh. Cedar Mirror. By morning, the video had over 60,000 views. By nightfall, 250,000. The comments poured in, dozens every minute. "This gave me chills. Dogs know. They always know." She's trying to come back, and they're trying to help. Cursed ground. Shouldn't mess with the dead. These dogs need to be removed. This is disturbing. What if she's alive? What if she never died at all? Some viewers shared stories of dogs sensing death. Others quoted scripture. A retired K-9 officer in Florida posted a video response saying, "That German Shepherd isn't grieving, he's tracking." Local news showed up within 2 days, national media the day after. And standing at the edge of the cemetery, watching his dog lead a silent brigade into the soil, Graham Jensen realized something he couldn't admit even to himself. He wasn't hoping they'd stop. He was hoping they'd reach her. But not everyone agreed. A city council meeting was called. Protesters gathered at the cemetery gates. A handful carried signs, "Respect the dead," and "Stop the digging dogs." A few neighbors called animal control. There were threats of euthanasia if the dogs couldn't be contained. The sheriff showed up again. "I have to respond to public concern," Lewis Mason told Graham gently, eyeing the dogs. "Even if I think this whole thing's something else." Graham looked down at Argo, whose paws were raw and bleeding but still digging with quiet determination. "You want to stop him?" Graham said. "Be my guest." The sheriff didn't move. Neither did the dogs. And in that moment, standing under the gray skies of a town that no longer knew what to believe, Dana whispered under her breath, "If they're cursed, then maybe curses come from the lies we bury." The Fair Hollow Town Hall hadn't been this full since the flood of '09. Every seat was taken. People lined the back wall, fanned themselves with folded paper agendas, and whispered with tight jaws and lowered voices. The air buzzed not with excitement but with unease. Between rows of veterans, business owners, and PTA mothers sat strangers holding printouts of viral screenshots as if proof could bring peace. In the front row sat Graham and Dana Jensen, silent, side by side. On the screen behind the mayor, a paused still from Dana's video. 10 dogs, 1 grave. Dust frozen midair. Mayor Klein adjusted his microphone. "Thank you all for coming. I know emotions are high. We are here to discuss the escalating situation at Cedar Mirror Cemetery and to find a peaceful resolution for all parties. We'll begin with Mr. Frank Holloway." The cemetery caretaker, Frank, stood, red-faced and furious. "I've worked those grounds for 27 years, he snapped, voice cracking. "And I have never seen the kind of damage we're dealing with now. They're digging trenches, ruining plots, disrupting the peace of the dead. I've had families threaten lawsuits. Graves ain't playgrounds." A murmur of agreement rippled through one side of the room. He turned toward Graham. "And that damn shepherd of yours, he started it. Don't act like he didn't." Graham met his gaze but didn't speak. Then Dr. Emily Lang rose, a tall, poised woman in her 50s, the town's only veterinarian. "I examined Argo last fall when he tore his paw on River Rock," she said. "Smart animal, obedient. But since the loss, I believe he's undergone extreme psychological stress." Dana blinked slowly. Dr. Lang continued, choosing each word carefully. "I suspect he's exhibiting obsessive-compulsive behavior, likely grief-induced. Dogs mourn, they attach. But they don't understand death, especially when there's no body." Graham's jaw clenched. "Mentally unstable?" someone repeated from the back. "Unwell," Lang corrected, "and contagious. Pack behavior spreads quickly among canines. It's not supernatural, it's science." Mayor Klein nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Doctor. He's not grieving." Graham's voice cut through the room like a taut wire snapping. Everyone turned. He stood slowly, eyes hollow but sharp, voice steady even as it trembled. "He's not grieving. He's pointing." Some people looked confused. Others chuckled. "I've known that dog since the day we brought him home. He doesn't obsess. He doesn't disobey. Not without reason. That leash didn't break. It was left." Dana reached for his hand under the table, but he didn't stop. "You're all looking at behavior. I'm looking at intent." He pointed toward the screen. "They're not digging randomly. They're digging one spot, every day. Argo doesn't need a reason. He knows." The room fell silent, until someone from the back shouted, "Then where's the body?" A pause, then a second voice. "And where's the man who said he saw her drown?" That name hadn't been mentioned in days, but now the weight of it echoed. Paul Vickers, the man who sounded the alarm, the only direct witness. Gone. No forwarding address. No job record. His rental left unlocked, his mailbox full. Even his car abandoned behind the bar on Route 6. The room shifted. People exchanged glances. Some fidgeted. Others finally looked away from Graham and back to the screen. Frank folded his arms. "That proves nothing. People leave." "But kids don't disappear without a trace," said a quiet voice near the exit. Mayor Klein cleared his throat. "I understand tensions are high. This town has suffered a tragedy. But unless we find concrete evidence, something more than instinct or animal behavior, we are legally bound to uphold cemetery policy. Dogs will be restricted. Any further trespassing will result in removal by force if necessary." Dana inhaled sharply. Graham didn't flinch. Neither did Argo, who waited just outside the town hall door, ears alert, watching through the glass as if he already knew. Truth was no longer a question of belief. It was a matter of how far they were willing to go to dig it up. Fair Hollow slept under a thick blanket of fog that night, the kind that muffled everything: sound, stars, judgment. Sheriff Lewis Mason parked his cruiser 2 blocks away from the Jensen house. He left the engine running, headlights off, heart dragging like an anchor in his chest. He hadn't worn the uniform. Not tonight. Not for this. Just jeans, boots, and a windbreaker, zipped halfway up like it could protect him from what he was about to do. Graham was already waiting by the fence, flashlight off, hands deep in his coat pockets. He didn't speak. Neither did Louis. They just walked, side by side. 2 fathers. 2 men carrying a weight that didn't belong entirely to either of them, but somehow had settled in both of their bones. The cemetery loomed like a sleeping thing, all angles and shadows and silence. They moved past the gates, and there, like clockwork, Argo lay at the base of Elara's grave, his body curled, eyes open, ears twitching, tail thumping the earth every few seconds like he was counting something the rest of them couldn't hear. Graham knelt beside him, ran a hand across the shepherd's back. "He hasn't moved all day," he said softly. "Not even for food." Lewis exhaled through his nose. "I've been sheriff here 16 years. Knew Elara since she had that Dora the Explorer backpack and insisted I was the toy cop." He smiled, bitter. "I've buried people, arrested friends, sat with widows after accidents. I've seen grief mutate." Graham looked up. "You think this is grief?" Lewis didn't answer. Instead, he crouched, ran a calloused hand over the edge of the grave, fingers grazing the disturbed soil that had never truly settled. The ground was uneven. It always had been. Argo never let it rest long enough to heal. "Council's got half the town on my back," he said. "Said if I don't stop the dog, they'll call state services, animal control. maybe worse." Graham nodded once. "Then let them." Louis glanced at him, weary. "You know how this makes me look? Maybe it's not about looks anymore." Another silence, only the rustle of dry leaves, the low whistle of wind. Argo shifted, let out a quiet whine, and placed his paw on the dirt like a bookmark. Louis stood. "I'm not doing this for politics. I know. I'm not doing it because I believe in ghosts." "You don't have to." Louis turned, looked him in the eye. "I'm doing it because I've never seen a dog lie. People? Sure. Kids, politicians. But not a dog like this. Not with eyes like that." He took a slow breath, pulled out his phone. At 2:14 a.m., an official request for emergency exhumation was filed under the Fair Hollow County Sheriff's Office. Reason: unstable grave conditions, possible burial irregularities. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As they walked back toward the cruiser, Louis paused. "You're not going to sleep tonight, are you?" "No." "Me neither." Behind them, Argo lifted his head, ears rising with a snap. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just stared at the earth and waited. By the time the sun breached the eastern ridge, a crowd had already formed behind the police tape. It began with just a few neighbors, curious, cautious, coats zipped to their chins. Then came the reporters, the ones who'd been stalking Dana's social feed since the video went viral. And then the others. Strangers from out of town, people clutching coffee cups and phones, whispering theories like prayers. Some brought their dogs. None of them barked. They just sat, ears perked, eyes fixed on the grave. The sheriff's department had arrived before dawn. Louis Mason stood to the side of the marked perimeter, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the grave workers move with the slowness of ritual. His face was unreadable, except for the way he blinked less often than normal, like a man trying not to miss a single second. The grave itself was now roped off with yellow tape. Bright signs read, "Exhumation in progress. Do not cross." It was more than official now. It was irreversible. Dana stood just beyond the tape, clutching Graham's hand so tightly her knuckles had gone bone white. She hadn't spoken since the moment they left the house. Her wedding ring was turned inward. Her lips trembled, not from cold, but from the kind of tension the body wasn't built to contain. And beside her, unmoving except for his slow, steady breathing, was Argo. The shepherd, usually so restless, so urgent, sat perfectly still, like a sentinel, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this morning. The first layer sod peeled back in clean rolls. The grass had never truly taken root. Beneath that, packed earth. And beneath that, silence thick enough to swallow thought. The shovels moved in practiced rhythm, not like digging, like revealing, the way you'd uncover a truth someone tried too hard to bury. Graham didn't realize he was holding his breath until the backhoe stopped. The lead worker, a lean man with a gray beard and blue bandana, wiped his brow, then nodded toward the earth. Two younger men stepped forward. With gloved hands and quiet reverence, they lifted the edges of the white, child-sized casket. For a beat, no one breathed. Even the cameras stilled. The casket emerged like a relic, its lacquered surface streaked with damp soil. It was lighter than expected. Too light. The crowd pressed forward unconsciously, and then muffled gasps. It came not from one voice, but from the collective inhale of dozens. The casket had shifted slightly off-center in its resting space, as if something had jostled it, or someone had tried to move. The lead worker froze, eyes wide. "Sheriff," he said, "you better come look at this." Lewis moved forward, lifting the lid latch. It wasn't locked. It should have been. He hesitated, then opened it. Dana turned her face into Graham's shoulder before the first inch passed. Inside, the bracelet was still there. The elephant, the book. But the child-sized gown was folded flat against the silk lining. The body was gone. There were no screams. No one moved. Argo stood slowly, not barking, not whining, just stood and stared into the casket with the quiet certainty of a creature who had never needed words to say, "I told you." For a few seconds, no one moved. The open casket sat under the pale wash of morning light, the silk interior blindingly white and utterly, horrifyingly empty. No bracelet, no teddy bear, no gown, no girl, just an absence so loud it felt like it had a voice of its own. The first sound that broke the silence wasn't human. It was Argo. He let out a long, trembling howl that seemed to rise from somewhere ancient, something not bred into him, but buried. A sound made not of throat and lungs, but grief and knowing. Low at first, then higher, drawn out like a siren that called not for help, but for truth. His whole body shook as it left him, and when it ended, a strange hush returned, until one of the younger officers, standing by the caution tape, whispered, "Dear God," then dropped to his knees and wept into his hands. He didn't even try to hide it. Dana's face went white, not pale drained. Her body stiffened. She pulled back from the scene, eyes wide and unblinking, as if she couldn't process what she wasn't seeing. Her fingers clutched at Graham's sleeve, then at nothing. She stumbled 2 steps back and vomited into the grass. Sheriff Mason stepped forward instinctively to help her, but Graham caught her instead, arms locking around her waist. She didn't cry. Her body just emptied, like the casket. Graham turned back. His voice cracked the air like a bolt of glass. "Where is my daughter?" The lead grave worker staggered back. No one answered, because no one could. Sheriff Mason looked into the box again, brows furrowed, searching for even the smallest trace hair, cloth fiber, button, thread. Nothing. The inside looked unused, not like it had held a body, like it never had. Mason turned to the forensics tech, jaw tight. Was the casket sealed? The woman hesitated. It should have been. Standard burial protocol. But the latchet wasn't engaged. The screws weren't tightened. Dana found her voice raspy and hoarse. "I closed it myself. I remember, I folded the blanket over her legs. I kissed her forehead." She stared at her own words like they belonged to someone else. "I locked it. I know I did." The whispers started again, from the crowd, from the press. One man murmured, "It's a hoax." Another, "She's alive." Another still, "They buried an empty box." And then a woman with tear-rimmed eyes, barely more than a whisper, "Or someone took her." Graham turned on Sheriff Mason, voice still shaking with fury. "You filed the death certificate. You told us the divers searched every inch of that lake." "They did." "Then where is she? Where's her body, her bracelet, her anything?" Argo let out a sharp bark that jolted everyone, like punctuation at the end of an accusation. The dog stepped forward and looked up at Mason, then back at the casket. Then he sat down beside it, shoulders squared, head high, as if to say, "Now do your job." Sheriff Mason exhaled slowly and pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 1. I need a lockdown on the cemetery perimeter, and I want someone digging into the burial chain of custody, every person, every step, start with Paul Vickers. The dispatcher crackled back. Paul Vickers hasn't been seen in over 2 weeks. For the first time that morning, Dana cried. But the tears weren't the kind she'd shed at the funeral. They weren't the kind that came from goodbye. They were the kind that came from the one word she no longer dared to speak aloud. Hope. Sheriff Lewis Mason stood before the casket like a man trying to remember how to breathe. The box was still open, still empty, still loud in its silence. He turned slowly toward the gathering crowd, toward the journalists whose cameras had fallen still, toward neighbors holding their children tighter, toward the Jensens, one trembling, the other burning from the inside out. Then he faced the officers behind him. His voice was low, but there was no mistaking the shift in it. Seal off this site. A pause. This is no longer a burial. This is a crime scene. Gasps. Someone dropped their phone. A woman covered her mouth. The older reporter from Channel 9 whispered, "Oh my God," as she adjusted her mic. Sheriff Mason kept going. Effective immediately, the death of Elara Jensen is no longer considered confirmed. This case is being reclassified as an active missing child investigation. He paused, eyes on the brass corner of the casket. And possibly abduction. No one clapped. No one cheered. But a ripple passed through the crowd. Not just disbelief. Permission. Permission to believe the unthinkable. Graham didn't move. Not until Argo did. The German shepherd rose slowly from where he'd been sitting beside the grave and stepped forward, silent but purposeful. He placed one paw deliberately on the disturbed dirt beside the casket, and then he looked up, straight into Graham's eyes. The look wasn't frantic, wasn't confused. It was steady, clear, like a compass waiting to be followed. Graham took one step toward him. He crouched, ran a hand down Argo's flank, and whispered just loud enough for the dog, and maybe the dead, to hear. "Let's go." From the top of the ridge, the morning sun finally cracked fully over the tree line, casting the graveyard in amber light. It hit the polished casket and bounced upward, reflecting briefly into the lenses of a dozen stunned onlookers. No one could explain what was happening, but everyone knew the story had changed. No longer a tragedy. Now, a hunt. The sound came just after midnight. A crash, then a thud, then silence. Graham was already halfway down the hall before Dana sat upright in bed, clutching at the sheets. He didn't bother grabbing the baseball bat from under the stairs. Something about the noise wasn't threatening. It was purposeful. When he flicked on the hallway light, he saw the door to Elara's room cracked open, and Argo's tail disappearing inside. He pushed the door open fully and stepped into a place time had sealed. Dust floated in the beam of the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. Elara's bookshelf still stood by the far wall, untouched. Her comforter, yellow with faded sunflowers, was still tucked at the corners. The air carried that strange mix of old baby lotion, plastic dolls, and something missing. Argo stood in front of her dresser. His paws had scattered papers, toy jewelry, and a fallen stuffed otter across the floor. The top drawer was open, nearly pulled off its hinges. In his mouth, gripped gently between his teeth, was Elara's old hairbrush. Wooden handle, chewed at the end from when she was 5. Graham froze. "Argo." But the dog didn't respond. Instead, he turned and trotted past him. Out the room, down the stairs, through the doggy door, and into the night. By the time Graham caught up, Argo had already begun digging in the farthest corner of the yard, beneath the willow tree that shed in spirals, like it wept all year. The shepherd dug fast, nose brushing the dirt between swipes. Then he stopped. He pawed gently at the ground, then stepped aside. Graham knelt down and reached in. What he pulled from the soft soil wasn't a treasure. It was a single bristle. Fine, honey-colored, curled at the tip. Argo barked once, then ran 10 feet to the left and started digging again. And again. By dawn they had found 5 buried bristles, each in a separate spot, each precisely 2 feet apart. But at the final hole, beneath a patch of disturbed grass and scattered acorns, Graham's fingers hit something harder. Cardboard. Laminated edge. He pulled it out. A receipt. Wet at the corners but still legible. Gas station. Highway 28. Date, July 3rd. Time, 6:11 p.m. Graham stared at the timestamp. 2 hours after the picnic. 2 hours after Elara was declared drowned. 2 hours after they gave up looking. He looked at Argo, breath shallow. "You buried it," he whispered. "You knew we weren't ready." Argo sat, panting lightly, eyes steady, like a soldier who had always followed orders until it was time to make his own. Back inside the house, Dana stared at the receipt like it might bite her. "That's 60 miles from here." "I know. She would have had to be alive to use it." Graham said nothing, because hope, once dead, is hard to resurrect with words alone. But somewhere deep inside the house, wind rustled the edges of Elara's coloring book, and outside 5 tiny holes in the earth whispered, "She left clues," and the dog remembered. The unmarked sedan pulled into the Cedar Mirror police lot just after noon, its dark windows glinting under the overcast sky. It didn't carry the weight of a typical cruiser, but the badge behind its windshield carried authority that could reach beyond town lines. Sheriff Lewis Mason stood outside waiting, hat in hand. He didn't extend it to greet her, because Detective Maris Quinn wasn't here for ceremony. She stepped out of the car like someone who didn't waste words or tolerate excuses. Shoulder-length hair twisted into a tight braid. No wedding ring. A notepad already in her left hand before she'd even closed the door. "You said it was an open and shut drowning," she said. "It was," Mason muttered, "until the casket was empty." Quinn arched one eyebrow. "Let's start there." In the briefing room she moved fast. Wall of photos, forensic reports, local maps. Elara's missing poster pinned dead center her yellow swimsuit barely visible in the cropped frame, cheeks sun-kissed, eyes bright. Quinn leaned in. "Where's the autopsy report?" "There wasn't one," Mason admitted. "No body. No body, no autopsy." "But still, an official death certificate?" Mason swallowed. "Signed by Dr. Hamill, based on 4 eyewitnesses, one of them Paul Vickers." That name caught her attention. She flipped through the arrest sheet on the table. "There's no Vickers in DMV or state records matching that face. Did you verify his identity at the time?" "We didn't think to. He was new to town, rented a cabin a few weeks before. Quiet, polite, paid in cash." Quinn's eyes narrowed. "And he disappeared after the picnic." Mason nodded. "Left his cabin unlocked. Mail piled up, dog bowl full, like he left mid-meal." Quinn pulled out her phone, typed something quickly, then turned it face down. "I pulled cell tower pings near the Jensen residence the night of July 3rd. One burner number pinged near the lake, then again 60 miles north, 2 hours later." She opened her folder and held up a blurry security cam still from a rural gas station. "There's the receipt your officer found buried. Here's the timestamp. And that's his car." She slid the image forward. A white Subaru Outback, mud-splashed, tinted windows, no plates visible. Behind the wheel, a shadowed figure. In the back seat, hard to make out, but unmistakably present something small, with long hair and a yellow strap across the shoulder. Quinn circled it with her pen. "Tell me no one else thought this was worth reopening." "I reopened it," Mason said quietly. "But we weren't equipped." "You still aren't." She stood up. "Whoever Paul Vickers was, he planned this. A fake name, an exit route, no digital trace. But you know what he didn't plan for?" She looked toward the hallway, where a faint bark echoed down from the lobby. "The dog." Maris Quinn's voice softened, but her eyes didn't. "I've seen every kind of abduction custody disputes, trafficking rings, ransom drops, but I've never seen a case reopened because a German shepherd wouldn't stop digging up a grave." She glanced back at the photo on the board. "Elara Jensen's alive." She turned to Mason. "And I'm going to prove it." The forest swallowed most sound, except for the crunch of boots on dried leaves and the rhythmic pant of a dog who refused to slow down. Argo moved with a focus that transcended training. He didn't wait for commands, didn't hesitate at forks in the trail. His nose skimmed the air like it could separate memory from time, scent from silence. Detective Maris Quinn and Graham followed close behind, ducking under low branches as the narrow path grew wilder. Graham's heart pounded, not from exertion, but from a pressure building in his chest, like something long buried was clawing its way out. "This way," Quinn murmured, keeping pace. "He knows." They emerged into a clearing just before dusk. The sky above was smeared with orange and ash, and in the center of the opening stood a cabin old, forgotten, draped in moss and rot. Windows boarded. Door half hanging. No footprints, no tire tracks, just the weight of a secret that had waited too long. Argo stopped at the porch, then sat. Quinn pulled out her gun and nodded at Graham. "Stay behind me." Inside, the air smelled like mildew and smoke, but under it all was something else, something faint, familiar. Children's shampoo. The floor creaked beneath their steps. A moth fluttered from a cracked mirror. Cobwebs hung like lace from the ceiling fan. Argo moved again, low and quiet, toward the far corner of the room where the wood was warped near the fireplace. He began to dig, not like at the grave, but quick, frantic scrapes, controlled urgency. Quinn knelt and helped pull back a broken plank. And there, tucked into the shadows under the floorboards, was a child's butterfly barrette. Purple, plastic. A crack along one wing. Graham sank to his knees. He knew it instantly. "Elara wore that to the picnic," he whispered. "I clipped it in myself." He didn't finish. Quinn stood, flashlight sweeping the room. She paused at the wall near the window, where something peeked out beneath the peeling wallpaper. She stepped forward, peeled it back carefully. There, scratched with what looked like a small stone or nail, 31 tally marks, lined up in uneven rows, some deep, some faint, but each one deliberate, a calendar for the forgotten, a record of survival. That night, back home, Dana sat curled on the couch, fingers trembling as she held the photo Quinn had taken of the wall. She traced the marks with her eyes and whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "She was counting the days." Her voice cracked. "She was waiting for us." Outside, Argo lay beneath the porch light, head resting on his paws. His eyes didn't close. Because for him it wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time in weeks, his tail thumped softly once against the porch rail. Because now, they were finally on her trail. The woods near the old water treatment plant were thicker than Graham remembered, overgrown with thorned vines and forgotten fences, as if the land itself had tried to erase what lay beyond it. But Argo didn't care. He pressed forward, nose low, body taut with attention Graham had come to trust more than any map. Each time the trail twisted, Argo didn't hesitate. He led with the urgency of something remembered, not something guessed. Detective Quinn followed, flashlight in one hand, the other resting lightly on the grip of her holstered weapon. "No signs of animal tracks," she said quietly. "Only human." Graham, swatting at a branch, muttered, "Then we're not chasing a ghost." They crested a ridge and descended into a basin choked with cattails and rusted fence wire. Below, nestled against a thicket of trees like a half-buried memory, stood the old Cedar Mirror water treatment facility, abandoned for decades, now consumed by ivy and silence. Argo froze at the tree line, then barked once. Low, controlled. Warning. Graham moved first, shouldering his way down the embankment with Quinn close behind. The brush snagged at his coat like fingers that didn't want him there. Half buried in the mud near a cracked drainpipe, he saw them. Footprints. Small, recent, too small to belong to an adult, too deep to be weeks old. Graham dropped to one knee. "They're hers," he whispered. "I know it." Quinn took a photo, her voice careful. "More than one set. See? Larger boot prints next to them. Someone's walking with her. Or forcing her." Argo turned, eyes fixed on the structure ahead. The plant loomed, windows shattered, the main access door bolted shut with an iron chain. "Front's blocked," Quinn said. "Back entrances were welded during decommissioning. No easy way in." Graham was already scanning the ground. His eyes landed on a rusted crowbar, half buried beneath fallen leaves. "Then we make a way." The metal screamed as he forced the tool between the door's seams. Rust cracked. The frame groaned. Argo backed up, ears flattened. Quinn held her breath. And then the door popped, not wide, but enough. The scent that spilled out wasn't mold or decay. It was something far more human, body heat, oil from skin, recently opened food. Graham's stomach dropped. They're still using this place. Quinn pulled out her weapon and clicked off the safety. "We move quiet," she said. "No flashlights. Let the dog lead." Graham turned to Argo, who was already crouched low, nose to the dark hallway like he could smell the days she spent inside. The shepherd didn't look back, because the truth wasn't behind them anymore. It was here, inside, and it was waiting. The corridor inside the plant stretched like a forgotten vein, long, cold, dimly lit by slivers of fading daylight that pierced through cracks in the boarded windows. Every step echoed. Metal groaned above, as if the building itself was remembering something it never wanted to hold. Argo moved ahead, ears high, but his gait changed. Slower now, not from hesitation, but reverence. Something here was sacred. Something here was not supposed to exist. They reached a door halfway down the left wing. A number was spray-painted on it. 12, faint, jagged, fading like it had been painted in haste. Quinn reached for the handle. It wasn't locked. It creaked open on rusted hinges, and there, beneath the soft cone of light breaking through the ceiling was the room. Dozens of boxes, cardboard, stacked, labeled. Some had yellow tags, others pink. Some had numbers, others names, children's names. Graham stepped inside first. "What is this?" Quinn was already pulling gloves on. She approached one stack marked Group B, Intake 0307, and peeled back the top. Inside, a child's windbreaker, a pair of pink rain boots, size 11, a laminated school ID for a boy named Kyle, age 9. Another box, crayons, a stuffed giraffe, a baby monitor with the battery pulled, each box like an obituary without a date. Argo sniffed the corner near the far wall, then barked. Once. Sharp. He nosed at a smaller box shoved halfway beneath a rusted utility table. Quinn grabbed it and brought it into the light. No label on top, just one name inside. Elara. Graham's knees gave out. He hit the concrete hard, hands trembling as Quinn slowly opened the lid. Inside, a child's swim towel, a shoelace looped around a shell bracelet, and tucked into the corner, wrapped in tissue, a purple butterfly hair clip. The other half of the pair they'd found beneath the cabin. Graham reached for it as if it might burn him. "This was hers," he whispered. His voice broke apart. "I clipped it in. I remember. That morning, before we left for the picnic." His chest collapsed forward, body folding over the box like a man praying to something he couldn't name. The concrete beneath him darkened with silent tears. Quinn stood beside him, eyes scanning the rest of the room. "This isn't just about Elara," she said flatly. "This is bigger, coordinated, documented." She turned toward the hallway. "And we're not the first ones to find this place." But Argo remained frozen at the threshold, nose still, shoulders rigid. He was listening, because somewhere beyond this room of stolen childhoods, something else waited, something that still breathed. It started with the crunch of gravel, barely audible, but Argo heard it. He stiffened, ears twitching, then growled low and guttural from the back of his throat. Quinn spun around. "Someone's coming." Graham barely had time to shove the butterfly clip into his pocket before Argo nudged him toward the shadowed corner of the room. Quinn yanked the door nearly shut, leaving only a sliver to see through. Outside, footsteps. 2 sets. Heavy, confident. One man laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound that felt wrong in the air. "I told you it was safe," one said. "They won't come here. This place is dead." A key scraped against the outer lock. Graham's pulse thundered in his ears. They weren't just scavengers. They were returning. The door opened, spilling pale daylight into the box-filled room. 2 men entered, both dressed in nondescript workwear, boots still caked in dried mud. One carried a flashlight. The other had a long knife hanging from his belt like it wasn't the first time he'd used it. They didn't look around. They knew this room. They'd been here before. Argo crouched low behind a stack of boxes, body rigid like drawn wire. Then, a snap. A box corner gave under Graham's boot. The man with the knife froze. "You hear that?" Too late. Argo lunged. Teeth found flesh. The man screamed as Argo slammed into him with the full weight of a trained K9, dragging him to the ground. The knife clattered across the concrete. The second man reached for something under his coat. Graham surged forward, tackled him against the wall. They struggled, fists flying, pain flaring. A crate tipped, spilling toys across the floor. Then Graham spotted it. The crowbar. He grabbed it, swung. The sound of metal on bone cracked through the room. The man crumpled. Breathing hard, Graham staggered back, blood trickling from his temple. The room fell still again, only Argo's panting and the groan of the man pinned under him breaking the silence. Then a voice from the hallway, raspy, firm. "Don't move." Graham turned. An old woman stood in the doorway, hair white, skin leathered by sun and time. She wore a housecoat and slippers, but cradled in her arms, steady and sure, was a .22 rifle aimed squarely at the man on the floor. "You picked the wrong woods," she said. "Margaret?" Graham blinked. "What are you—" "I live up past the ridge," she said. "I've been watching this place, heard things, knew something was wrong. When I saw the dog run in, I followed." She looked down at the writhing man beneath Argo. "You want me to shoot him in the knee?" Graham shook his head. "No, but thank you." Margaret gave a small nod. "You're not alone anymore, sweetheart," she said gently. "And that little girl, if she's out there, we're going to find her." The man moaned under Argo's weight. Quinn cuffed both attackers with zip ties pulled from her jacket. Then she turned to Margaret. "Ma'am, you just inserted yourself into an active felony investigation." Margaret lifted the rifle. "Damn right I did." Outside, the sun was lowering behind the trees, casting long, trembling shadows. But inside the old plant, the silence had shifted. Now it was a silence holding its breath, because they weren't the only ones hunting anymore. By dawn, the air above Cedar Mirror hummed with rotors. Black SUVs crunched over gravel as tactical boots flooded the clearing around the abandoned water treatment plant. Yellow vests marked FBI. A voice barked orders through a megaphone. No one, not even the trees, was left to pretend this place didn't matter anymore. Quinn stood near the facility's rusted gate, arms crossed, a gash on her temple taped shut. Argo sat by her feet, calm but alert. Graham paced nearby, eyes fixed on the horizon as if watching for something he didn't want to name. The raid was swift. By the hour's end, they'd cleared all 4 wings of the building. 2 more underground rooms were uncovered, one with shackles on the wall, the other filled with computers, wiped clean but still humming, the scent of recent use lingering like breath on glass. Then, in the storage room beneath what had once been the filtration floor, they found the mother lode, a locked cabinet. Inside, folders, paperwork, maps, lists, and on those lists, names. Quinn sat on the concrete with one file cracked open across her lap. She read silently, her face unreadable, as Graham leaned over her shoulder. Each page held a list of children. Each name had a status beside it. Intake, hold, ready, transferred. Some were crossed out in red. Some were tagged with codes that meant nothing to Graham but made Quinn's hands tremble as she flipped the pages faster. "This isn't just trafficking," she murmured. "It's cataloging, like livestock. Every movement tracked, every child accounted for." Graham's throat closed. "Is she on it?" he asked. Quinn didn't answer. She turned one more page, then froze. There, highlighted in yellow marker, Jensen, Elara, DOB 1004. Status, transferred Cumberland site, ETA, Octi 15. Driver, Vickers, Paul. Alias Graham dropped to his knees. "That's in 3 days," he breathed. "She's still... They're planning to move her again." Quinn looked up, her voice sharp. "This means she's alive. Graham, this proves it." From across the lot, an agent called out, "We've got burner phones, some still warm. Files were pulled an hour ago. They knew we were coming." "Runners," Quinn muttered. "Someone tipped them off." "They left in a hurry," the agent added. "But they left tracks." She turned to Graham, then to Argo, who was already standing, tail stiff, gaze fixed on the woods beyond the facility. He gave a sharp single bark, then looked at Graham. He didn't need a leash. He needed a direction. "They're not done," Graham said. "And neither are we." Quinn stood, holstering her weapon. "We go now, before they vanish again." The wind stirred as Argo moved forward, nose down, reading a path only he could follow, because the countdown had started. And someone, somewhere, still had Elara. The wind whipped across the ridge as the convoy stopped near an overlooked clearing. Pines bowed low under a sky thick with storm clouds, as if the forest itself was bracing for something. Graham stepped out of the SUV, Argo beside him. Quinn was already hunched over a metal case on the hood, flipping through the new evidence photos, GPS markers, timestamps. And then Duke, one of the FBI field agents, emerged from the woods. "I found this," he said, holding something in his gloved hand. "About half a mile from the last known location. It was buried beneath a pile of pine needles like someone dropped it in a rush." He held it out, a small pink digital watch, the kind a child might pick from a rack at a gas station, plastic, glitter-lined edges, one of the buttons half broken. Graham froze. "That's hers," he said, voice hoarse. "That's Elara's. I bought it for her birthday." Duke nodded. "Still ticking?" Quinn took it carefully. The screen blinked faintly. 03:12:26. She narrowed her eyes. "That doesn't make sense. It's not morning. It's not set to any known time zone." She clicked through the buttons. The numbers continued to count down. 03:12:25. 03:12:24. Graham leaned in. "Is it set wrong?" Quinn didn't answer. She stood there, frozen, watching it tick. Then her expression shifted. No longer confusion, but realization. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "It's not the time. It's a countdown." Silence fell. A long, heavy pause that felt like gravity itself shifted. Graham blinked. A countdown to what? Quinn's eyes scanned the treetops. Her thoughts were moving faster than she could speak. They gave her the watch on purpose, set it to end right as the transport window closes. It's how they timed the extractions. She looked at him, jaw tight. 3 hours from now they move her. Graham's knuckles turned white. "Then we find her in 2. Duke adjusted his comms. "I'll reroute the teams toward Cumberland County now. We can have birds in the air within 20. But Quinn's eyes were already on Argo, who had begun to pace along the edge of the overlook. His nose twitched. His stance shifted, like he knew. Graham followed his gaze. "Argo's already got the trail." The wind shifted. Below them, in the far distance, barely visible through trees and fog, a narrow, winding road leading toward the Cumberland Basin. Quinn closed the case and clipped the pink watch to her vest. It blinked again. 03:11:03. "I want everyone moving. Quiet. Fast. We don't wait for backup." Argo barked once. Not frantic, focused. Graham looked down at him. "You ready to bring her home, boy?" Argo didn't move, but his tail gave one slow thump against the gravel. The kind of answer that didn't need words, because now they weren't just chasing leads, they were racing the clock. And whatever waited at 0 would either save her life or mark the moment they were too late. The command tent buzzed with urgency, voices overlapping, fingers tapping at keyboards, drone feeds flickering on portable monitors. A portable satellite dish spun slowly near the tree line, pulling in grainy aerial images from the Cumberland Basin. Detective Quinn stood over a large topographic map taped to the hood of a black Suburban. 3 red circles marked potential sites: abandoned ranger stations, underground service tunnels, and an old railway maintenance depot no longer listed on official records. "We've got heat signatures near Site B," one tech called out, "but no movement." "No movement could mean she's restrained," someone else added. Quinn exhaled sharply. "Or it's a decoy." Another agent walked over, holding a headset. "Chopper will be overhead in 20. Do we split?" Quinn nodded. "Teams to all 3 sites. We coordinate on the move." But behind her, Graham stepped forward, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the tree line where Argo stood, tail stiff, body already leaning forward like a coiled spring. "You can run your ops," he said quietly, "but I'm going with him." Quinn turned. "Graham, we don't have time to gamble." "This isn't a gamble," he said. "You got machines and maps. I've got him." He pointed to Argo. "He's been right since day 1. He dug up her grave when nobody listened. He broke into her room to find the hairbrush. He led us to that cabin, that barrette, the tally marks." His voice cracked. "And I'm telling you, he still knows where she is." Argo whined, low impatient. Quinn hesitated. Then she glanced at the countdown timer clipped to her vest. 02:29:13. Her shoulders dropped. She reached into her jacket and pulled out an earpiece. "Fine. You go with him. You stay on comms. If he deviates, if it gets dangerous—" "I'm not turning back," Graham said. Quinn stared at him for a beat, then nodded. "You've got 1 shot." The sky darkened with fast-moving clouds as Graham knelt beside Argo. "You ready, boy?" Argo didn't wait. He lunged forward, nose to the ground, weaving between pines, cutting into the underbrush with alarming precision. Graham followed boots crunching roots, branches clawing at his arms, lungs already burning. Behind them voices crackled over radios. "Team Alpha moving. Team Bravo en route to tunnel marker. Site B, quiet, no movement yet." But Graham didn't hear it anymore, because this wasn't a mission. It was a father chasing the last thread of hope he had left. And somewhere out there, beneath trees and time and terrible silence, his daughter was waiting. Graham didn't know where, didn't know how far, but in his bones, in the kind of place no map could reach, he felt her. The idea that she was gone had been forced down his throat for weeks, wrapped in condolences, drenched in tearful casseroles and polite silences. People had lowered their voices when he passed, had avoided his eyes at the grocery store. They spoke of Elara in the past tense. But Argo never did. And that was enough. Now, Graham stood at the edge of the forest where Argo had pulled him. Not barked, not dragged, but simply walked, with purpose, with precision, pausing only to glance back when Graham hesitated. The sun was barely up, shadows still long and soft on the underbrush. The air smelled of pine and something else, old wood and something missing. Behind him, Detective Maris Quinn loaded her service pistol and checked the GPS tracker on Argo's collar. 3 miles of rough terrain between here and the last ping, she said, and no backup for another hour. Graham didn't answer. He stared into the trees like a man trying to hear what the forest refused to say. "She's alive," he whispered, not to Quinn, but to the space between branches. Argo gave a soft chuff, as if to say, "I know." And then he moved, not fast, not reckless, deliberate. One paw print after another across the damp earth. They followed him. Through thickets that clawed at denim, across streams where water whispered secrets, past hollowed-out logs and animal bones bleached by time, and all the while that one line throbbed in Graham's chest like a second heartbeat. His daughter was waiting, not just trapped, not just hidden, waiting, because she knew, like he did now, that Argo would never stop, because she'd whispered to him in the dark, because she had held on when even the grown-ups had let go. An hour passed, then another. At one point they stopped to drink. Quinn offered Graham her canteen, but he waved it away, eyes locked on Argo, who had stilled at the base of an ancient tree. He was sniffing the bark, then the ground. Then he turned, ears forward. Graham froze. The trail bent northward toward a stretch of old ranger cabins long abandoned after the floods 5 years back. The state had fenced it off, declared it unsafe, but beyond the warning signs and collapsed roofs, something flickered, a curtain, just for a second. Graham's heart slammed. Quinn drew her weapon. "Wait," she mouthed. But Argo was already moving. He didn't run. He approached, every muscle ready. And then, when he reached the back of the third cabin, he stopped, laid down, and looked back. Graham stepped forward, one hand on his chest, the other on the rusted doorknob. Inside the cabin, it smelled like mildew and sweat, old socks, and something faintly sweet like canned peaches. Then he heard it, a breath, quick, shallow, not his. He turned the corner and saw her, tucked behind a broken cabinet, wrapped in a threadbare blanket with butterflies on it, eyes wide, lips trembling, pale but alive. "Daddy," she said. His knees gave out, but his arms didn't. He pulled her into him and sobbed. Argo pressed against them both, tail thumping, breath ragged, and the trees outside held still, like even nature knew that somewhere out there, beneath time and silence and everything lost, a girl had waited and been found. The farmhouse stood at the edge of the basin, its chipped white paint peeling under years of wind and weather. To most, it looked abandoned, silent, sagging at the roofline, the kind of place forgotten by maps and memory. But the heat signatures said otherwise. FBI agent Duke crouched beside a thermal drone monitor, his gloved fingers circling the screen. 15 warm bodies inside. No movement in the northeast wing, could be sleeping quarters or storage. One pacing figure near the front, possibly armed. Quinn swept her scope across the property. 4 exits, 1 main, 2 side, 1 back, curtains drawn, but windows cracked. Someone inside needs airflow. She glanced at her watch. 01:11:46. Time bleeding away. Nearby, Graham crouched beside Argo, who was panting, muscles taut, straining slightly against the lead clipped to his harness. He wasn't barking, just staring locked on something behind the farmhouse. Quinn noticed. "What's he looking at?" Graham followed Argo's gaze around the side, past the splintered woodshed, toward the back door. No cameras, no patrol. A single loose shutter knocked gently in the breeze like a heartbeat. "He sees something," Graham said. Quinn knelt, lowering her voice. "We breach in 7. Argo stays leashed." "He's not going to blow the op," Graham insisted. Argo sat, but his ears never stopped twitching. Duke's voice crackled through comms. "We go on your mark, Maris." Quinn's eyes flicked toward the farmhouse again. "They're not expecting company this deep, but something's off. 15 inside, no patrols, no dogs, no lookouts." She looked at Graham. "It's too quiet." Graham whispered, "Or it's a trap." The breeze shifted. Argo stood, head tilted, nose lifted slightly, then pointed with his snout to the back again. A silent signal, a different way in. Quinn turned to her team. Alpha surrounds east and west. Bravo takes main entrance on breach. Graham stay behind cover. No heroics. Graham tightened his grip on Argo's leash, but Argo didn't pull now. He waited, watching, calculating, and the look in his eyes was no longer one of restraint. It was anticipation, as if he already knew the walls were about to fall. Gunmetal dawn cracked through the clouds just as the breach began. "Go! Go!" Agent Duke's voice pierced the silence. Glass shattered. Doors slammed open. Shouts echoed across the field as FBI agents stormed the farmhouse from 3 angles, black vests slicing through fog like a blade. The chaos was choreographed loud commands, restrained panic, zip ties, and confusion from the dozen people inside. Within minutes they were pulling children out, one by one. 4, then 6, then 10. Their faces were pale. Some cried. Some stared blankly. All of them were underweight, trembling in the early light. Quinn moved quickly, tagging each with numbers, logging details, securing them into waiting vans with heated blankets and trauma medics. But Graham stood frozen near the porch steps, scanning each face as they passed. None of them were her. Argo was pacing now, restless, every fiber of his body straining. He whined, a low, sharp sound, then jerked his head upward. Graham followed the gaze. There, just beyond the main hall, a splintered staircase led to the attic, almost hidden behind a moth-eaten curtain. Quinn barked into her mic. "Clear upstairs yet?" "Negative, still checking ground." Crack! The leash snapped clean off. Argo bolted. "Argo!" Graham sprinted after him, shoving past a shocked agent. His boots thundered up the narrow stairs, each step groaning under his weight. The air changed. Dust thickened. A sour, stagnant scent filled the attic space. Graham shoved open the creaking door and stopped cold. The attic was dim. One broken window cast a diagonal beam of gray-blue light across the room. Boxes stacked like barricades, a moldy mattress in the corner. Toys, drawings, crayon and pencil, childish and desperate, taped along the wall like prayers no one had answered. And there, in the farthest corner, a small figure, curled up, clutching her knees. Elara. Her hair was longer, her frame thinner. But those eyes, they were his daughter's, and they were locked on him. "Daddy?" The word was a breath, not a voice. Graham fell to his knees, arms shaking. "Baby. Oh, my God." Argo crawled toward her first, tail low, whining. Elara reached out, not with fear but with recognition. She buried her face in his fur and let out a single sound, a sob. Graham crossed the room and wrapped them both in his arms. His heart hammered so loudly it drowned out everything, the shouts below, the radios, the boots on stairs. "I'm here," he whispered into her hair. "I've got you. You're safe now." Elara didn't answer with words. She just held on tighter, as if she'd spent every day in the dark, waiting for this exact moment. The attic faded away. The cracked wood beneath them, the stale air, even the distant sounds of agents shouting downstairs, none of it mattered. Because in the center of that dusty, forgotten room, a father and daughter were whole again. Graham dropped to his knees without thought or hesitation. His arms opened, trembling, and Elara, though thinner, quieter, somehow older than her 8 years, stumbled forward and collapsed into him. Her body folded into his like it had never left. He pressed his face into her shoulder, unable to breathe, unable to speak. His hands moved instinctively, checking her arms, her ribs, her cheeks, as if needing to confirm she was real and not some cruel figment his grief had conjured. "Elara," he choked, voice raw. But she only nodded against him. "I'm here, Daddy." And then came the sob deep, full-bodied, ripped from the center of her chest like a dam finally breaking. Graham held her through it, rocking slightly, burying his face in her hair, whispering over and over, "You're safe now. I've got you. I've got you." Behind them, Argo pressed in, gentle, tail sweeping slowly, nose nudging her calf. Elara turned and wrapped both arms around his neck. "I told them," she whispered into his fur. "I told them Argo would never stop looking." Graham pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. Tears streaked down her cheeks, but her eyes, God, her eyes still held that glint of light he thought he'd never see again. "He led us here," Graham said. "You were right." She touched Argo's head, resting her forehead to his. "He never gave up." "Neither did you," Graham wanted to say, but the words caught in his throat. Argo gave a soft whine, almost a sigh, and curled beside them, the guardian, who had outrun death, silence, and doubt to bring his girl home. The attic door creaked again as Quinn appeared, her voice low. "The medics are ready. We need to get her checked." Graham nodded, scooping Elara gently into his arms. She held tight to his collar, whispering, "Don't let go." "Never," he breathed. Argo followed, step for step, never breaking formation. And as they emerged from the shadows of that farmhouse into the tentative light of morning, into the stunned hush of agents and survivors, every head turned. Some gasped, others wept, but no one said a word, because some moments don't need explaining. Some reunions speak for themselves. The courthouse smelled like lemon cleaner and stale coffee, a place where truth was supposed to live, though it often arrived battered, bloodied, and late. Elara Jensen sat on the cushioned chair beside Detective Quinn, her legs too short to reach the floor. The courtroom had been cleared of press. Just a closed hearing, just enough people to hear her voice and maybe believe her. She clutched Argo's leash in both hands like it was a lifeline, and in many ways it was. Across the table, the state prosecutor nodded. "Elara, take your time. Tell us what happened." Silence. Then, a breath. "I remember the man," she said. Her voice was soft, unsure. "He said his name was Paul." "Paul Vickers?" the prosecutor asked. She nodded. "He wore sunglasses, even in the shade. He smelled like paint." The courtroom stilled. A clerk scribbled furiously. Elara looked down. Her thumb ran along the leash's edge. "I went to get another juice box. Mom was at the table. Dad was grilling." She closed her eyes. "He said my friend fell in." "That I needed to help, but there was no one in the water." "And then?" Her lip trembled. "He grabbed my arm." Dana sobbed quietly from the bench. Graham clenched his fists under the table. Argo, sensing the shift in Elara's breath, moved closer. She pressed her forehead to his for a moment, eyes closed. "I screamed," she whispered, "but only once." The story came in pieces, like shattered glass carefully arranged. She spoke of a van with no windows, of blankets that didn't smell like home, of a house with locked doors where kids weren't allowed to talk and grown-ups always whispered at night. "I didn't know what day it was, but I kept counting," she said. lifting her sleeve to reveal faint marker dots on her arm. So I wouldn't forget myself. Then came the question no one had dared ask until now. Why didn't you give up, Elara? Her eyes lifted, not to the prosecutor, but to Argo. Because I talked to him every night. A ripple of confusion passed through the room. In my head, she clarified, I'd tell him I was still here, that I missed my purple socks, that I didn't lose my bracelet, someone took it, that I wanted cereal again, that I'd wait. Graham bowed his head. Elara looked back at the prosecutor, voice stronger now. And I knew he heard me. The room was silent, the kind of silence that sinks into bone. Quinn finally spoke. Why do you believe that, Elara? Elara smiled, not wide, not for show. A small, brave thing. Because he didn't dig where they buried me. She looked at her dad, then at Argo. He dug where I actually was. The sun had barely lifted when Argo began to stagger. They were walking down the courthouse steps. Elara clutched in Graham's arms, her small hand tangled in the thick fur behind Argo's neck when he paused. His front legs buckled for a split second, just enough to make Graham stop mid-step. Elara, Graham whispered, setting her down. Something's wrong. Argo took another step, then another, and then collapsed. Argo, Elara cried, falling to her knees beside him. His sides rose unevenly, shallow breaths pushing through his ribs. His tongue lolled slightly, eyes fluttering, not in pain, but exhaustion. The kind that comes after giving more than one body is supposed to give. Graham dropped beside them, checking for wounds. His abdomen swelling, Quinn said, crouching fast. Internal bleeding, likely from the fight. No, Elara whimpered, pressing her hand against Argo's chest. You were fine. You were okay. Quinn was already on the radio. We need a medical evac veterinary, now. They carried Argo in a makeshift stretcher from the sheriff's truck. Elara refused to leave his side, her tiny fingers wrapped around his paw in the back seat, her other hand gripping Graham's. Sirens wailed, but inside that cab it was a different kind of sound. A girl refusing to let go. The vet techs rushed him through the sliding doors. Dr. Lang met them at the back entrance, hair disheveled, apron already stained. Prep the OR, now. What are his chances? Graham asked, voice cracking. Lang didn't answer, just pushed through the doors behind the gurney, and then Elara pulled out the phone. Later that night, long after the hallway emptied and the waiting room lights dimmed, Elara curled on the plastic bench, phone pressed to her lips. Graham sat beside her, silent. The screen glowed soft blue as she hit record. Hi, Argo, she whispered, voice trembling. It's me. A long pause. I'm not scared anymore. Not when you're here, she sniffled. So you can't leave, okay? You already brought me home. You already saved me. Now, I need you to come back too. Her voice broke. I'll wait, just like you did. I'll be right here. I promise. She ended the message and hit play again, over and over, filling the hallway with one voice, fighting to bring another back. The room was quiet, too quiet for a creature who had once filled fields with warning barks and doorways with unwavering presence. Now Argo lay still, tubes traced along his legs. A monitor beeped in a slow rhythm, measuring a heartbeat that had, just yesterday, led an entire town to the truth. His coat had been shaved in patches. A long line of stitches curved along his side, ugly and brave. Elara stood on a small stool beside the vet's table. Her hand was trembling, but she reached forward anyway, resting it on the broad plane of his chest. "Hey," she whispered, like she was sharing a secret. "I know you're tired." Her voice broke, but she didn't look away. "But you're not done yet." Dana sat behind her, fingers clutched in her lap. Graham stood like a statue near the door, afraid to move, afraid he'd somehow tip the moment into something irreversible. Even Dr. Lang stayed silent, arms folded, watching from the shadows. Elara leaned closer, her lips brushing Argo's ear. "You still have to teach the puppies how to guard. You still have to walk me to school. And you still have to howl at Mr. Bentley's rooster because he never learns." A pause. Her small fingers stroked beneath his jaw. "You still have to be my best friend." The room held its breath, and then, barely audible, a thump. His tail moved, once, then again. It wasn't strong, it wasn't bold, but it was Argo. Elara gasped softly, then smiled through tears that slipped freely now. "I knew you heard me." She kissed his forehead. "Welcome back." Outside the vet clinic, the sun had begun to rise. A faint, honey-colored light spilled over the rooftops. Across town, one by one, dogs stirred. A husky lifted its head in a backyard on Maple Street. A lab mix stood from a porch on Briar Lane. A shepherd mix blinked toward the horizon, and somewhere, far off, a single howl broke through the morning. Long, steady, familiar. The sterile hum of the veterinary clinic was broken only by the soft rhythm of machines, beeping, steady, fragile. In the corner of the dim recovery room, Argo lay motionless on the padded table, his side rising and falling in uneven waves. A bandage wrapped tight around his midsection, where the surgeons had fought for hours to stop the internal bleeding. Beside him, an IV line dripped slow and steady. The room smelled of antiseptic and cotton. Outside the window, dusk was curling into night. Elara hadn't left his side. She sat curled in a chair far too big for her, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. A nurse had brought her juice, but it sat untouched on the tray. Her father, Graham, stood just outside the glass partition, watching his daughter watch the dog who had saved her life more than once. Inside the room, it was silent, until Argo's ears twitched. Elara gasped. Barely a movement, but she'd seen it. She slid off the chair and approached quietly, her small fingers trembling as they reached for his paw, the one that always rested on her foot when she cried. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The lump in her throat was too big. And then Argo's mouth parted, just slightly. From somewhere deep inside, beneath pain and sedation and the edge of death, came a sound, a howl, low, raw, ragged, but alive. It cracked the silence like lightning through still air. The nurse, rushing in, froze in the doorway, eyes wide. "Did he?" Graham opened the door before she finished. Elara turned, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's here," she whispered, voice shaking. "He's still here." Argo didn't move again, but the sound lingered in the room, echoing in hearts more than ears. That howl wasn't just breath and instinct. It was declaration, defiance. He wasn't giving up. The vet came in moments later, speechless as he checked the machines and scanned the monitors. "Heart rate strengthening," he said. "Still weak, but holding steady." No one cheered. No one clapped. But Elara did something more powerful. She laid her forehead gently against Argo's and whispered, "You're not done yet." And somewhere inside that broken, mended body, Argo heard her. That night, the clinic made an exception. They let Elara sleep beside him, curled on the floor with only a blanket and the corner of Argo's bed beneath her head. Graham stayed in the waiting room, unable to rest, pacing between vending machines and old magazines. At 2:47 a.m., Argo shifted again. This time, his tail thumped, just once. It struck the edge of the bed like a soft drum beat enough to wake Elara. She sat up fast, blinking against the dim light. His eyes were open, just slits, glassy and slow, but open. "Elara?" Graham pushed the door open at her gasp. "He's awake," she said, her voice half sob, half laugh. "Daddy, he's looking at me." The vet rushed in again. Machines buzzed. A nurse brought a bowl of water, but Argo didn't move. He just stared at Elara, then slowly, so painfully, lifted his paw and placed it near her again, like always. News traveled fast. By morning, the story had already spread through town like a brush fire. The dog who led police to the missing girl. The dog who had taken down one of the traffickers with his own teeth. The dog who refused to let her be buried. And now, the dog who howled himself back from the edge of death. The Jensen's porch filled with cards and flowers. A group of kids from Elara's school painted a giant sign, "Thank you, Argo," covered in paw prints and crooked hearts. But inside the clinic, things remained quiet. Healing didn't come fast. Not for Argo, not for Elara, not for the family shattered by days that felt like lifetimes. Still, Argo got a little stronger each hour. The third day after surgery, he lifted his head for the first time. The fifth day, he drank water on his own. By the end of the week, he stood, just for a second leaning into Elara, like a tree against the wind, and when she laughed, he wagged his tail. Graham caught that moment on his phone. The blurry joy in his daughter's face, the soft tremble of Argo's tail, and the impossible miracle that somehow, some way, this dog had brought her back and fought to stay beside her. It went viral in under 2 hours. And for once, the world didn't just scroll by. They listened, they felt, and they remembered that sometimes the strongest warriors don't wear armor. They walk on 4 legs, and they howl when no one else can. They called it Operation Hollow Nest. Over 6 states, arrests came swiftly. Unmarked vans rolled into quiet cul-de-sacs at dawn. Warrants were served, names unsealed. Those who had smiled for the town paper were marched in cuffs past news cameras, eyes hollow, jaws clenched, in false innocence. Paul Vickers' real name, Jonathan Pell, was found hiding in a trailer outside Scranton, Pennsylvania. He had dyed his hair, changed his walk, but not his eyes. Elara had remembered those. "I never forgot his eyes," she told Quinn days earlier, "because they never blinked." The courtroom was full. Dana clutched Elara's hand. Graham sat on the other side, his arm behind both of them. Argo lay at their feet, a faint scar still visible through the fur on his rib cage. One by one, the perpetrators were named. One by one, their sentences fell. Some received 30 years, others life. Pell didn't speak during his trial, not once. But when the sentence was read, 5 consecutive life terms without parole, Elara looked at him straight on. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. And for the first time, he did. The town of Cedar Mirror gathered that weekend on the school lawn. Rows of white chairs faced a makeshift memorial of toys, candles, and handwritten names, children who had never been found or were found too late. Their faces now marked by school portraits, drawings, or in some cases, just first names and the phrase "loved." A soft wind rustled through the oak trees as the mayor stepped forward, his voice cracking more than once. "No words," he said, "can lift the weight. But maybe, just maybe, our remembering will keep them from vanishing." Parents hugged each other. Teens stood in silence, heads bowed. Children clutched their dogs' collars a little tighter. And at the front of it all, a line of 10 dogs sat, quiet, still, present. They had all joined Argo at the cemetery that morning. Now they sat again, lab, husky, shepherd, mutt-like. They understood what was being honored. Elara stepped forward last. In her hand, a folded crane. "I didn't know all their names," she said into the mic. "But I know they were scared, and I know someone should have come sooner." Her voice faltered. "But I also know someone did." She looked down at Argo, then released the crane into the wind. It lifted softly, fluttered once, then flew like it knew where to go. The auditorium smelled faintly of crayons, carpet glue, and orange slices. A banner stretched above the stage. "Heroes Among Us, Student Assembly." In red and blue felt letters, slightly crooked. Second graders buzzed in their seats. Teachers stood like sentries along the walls. The principal adjusted the mic nervously, then gestured toward the side curtain. "She's ready." The audience quieted as Elara Jensen walked onto the stage. 8 years old, hair tied back with a yellow ribbon, a tiny scar near her temple. In her hand, a folded index card. By her side, padding quietly, with controlled dignity, Argo. He wore no vest. He didn't need one. Elara stepped up to the mic. She took a moment. Looked out at the room, at kids who still believed monsters only lived under beds, and heroes wore capes. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "Hi, my name is Elara. Some of you know me. Some of you thought I was gone." A silence fell over the room, soft and respectful. "I was gone. Sort of. But someone came for me. Not in a police car. Not in a fire truck." She smiled and turned to Argo. "He came on 4 legs. A few kids gasped. Some clapped instinctively. He didn't fly. He didn't shoot lasers. He didn't talk. But he knew." Elara placed her hand on Argo's head. He leaned into it, as if it were the only thing holding him upright. "When I was scared, I thought about him. When I didn't know what day it was, I counted them on the wall. But when I didn't want to cry anymore, I imagined him digging, because I knew he wouldn't stop." Her voice cracked, but she didn't step back. "My dad says heroes run toward the danger, but I think real heroes just don't give up." She looked at the rows of classmates, their wide eyes, their still hands. "Heroes don't always wear capes," she whispered. "Sometimes they have fur." The entire room stood. A teacher wiped her eyes. One boy tried to clap but dropped his juice box. Even the principal took off his glasses. And in the stillness of that moment, Argo let out a soft bark. Just once. But enough. Later, on the blacktop, kids circled Argo like a living legend. Some were too shy to touch. Others gave him stickers or a single crayon as a gift. One girl whispered, "I want to be brave like you." And Elara? She didn't need a stage anymore. She stood taller now. Not because she was healed, but because she wasn't hiding. The frost had finally let go. Soft earth turned beneath Elara's small hands as she dug in the soil just outside the porch. She was quiet focused. Each bulb was planted with care, spaced evenly, pointed just right. Yellow tulips, her favorite. And Argos, too, she'd decided. Graham watched from the steps, coffee in hand, his flannel shirt hanging loose over a faded cedar mirror rescue tee. The sunrise hit his silvering hair in streaks. He hadn't shaved in days, but his eyes were clearer now. Donna stood just inside the doorway, watching them both. For the first time in what felt like forever, her shoulders weren't curled forward like she was carrying a ghost. The door creaked, then paused. Heavy, slow, but certain. Argo stepped out. He limped, still right leg stiff from the surgery, but he moved with purpose. Each step seemed to echo against the wood planks. He paused by the porch railing, nose twitching. Then he moved toward the tulips. Elara didn't look up at first. She just kept patting the dirt. But when she felt the warm shadow at her back, she turned and smiled. "You came?" Argo lowered himself beside her, resting his chin near the first row of planted bulbs. Graham stepped down beside them, his boots sinking slightly in the thawed ground. He crouched, placed a hand on Argo's back, the way you would with an old friend, not to control, but to stay connected. His voice was soft. "We're all home now." Time slowed in that backyard. The wind rustled through the newly budding trees. Somewhere, a cardinal sang. From the cemetery hill, dogs no longer came to dig, but one could still see paw prints frozen into the hardened clay like signatures on a story they had written together. Inside the house, Elara's drawings had returned to the fridge. A new one joined them that morning. 3 figures in crayon, 1 man, 1 girl. And a German shepherd, eyes too large for his head. As Elara leaned her head against Argo's side, he exhaled. A long, tired breath, but not empty, not done. His eyes fluttered open, still watching the yard, still scanning the trees, still guarding the space where the yellow tulips would bloom, because even now, Argo was on duty, in a world that often feels uncertain. The unwavering loyalty of a dog like Argo reminds us of the kind of love that doesn't falter. Through storms of grief, silence, and fear, it was not sirens or heroes in uniforms that brought Elara home, but the instinct of a German shepherd who refused to forget. This story isn't just about rescue. It's about faith, about how animals often understand what words cannot say. Argo's journey is a testament to the invisible threads that bind hearts across distance, danger, and even death. His watchful eyes, his refusal to give up, show us a truth we too often overlook. Sometimes the purest courage walks on 4 legs. To everyone watching, may we honor our animals the way they honor us. May we never underestimate the intelligence, emotion, and purpose they carry. And may this story inspire deeper compassion, especially for working dogs who serve not just with training but with soul. Because real heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they leave paw prints and plant tulips in the places we once thought lifeless. That's not just a story. That's a reminder to love harder, to believe deeper, and to always, always listen.